After generating $12.3 million in revenue during our company's most profitable quarter in history, my boss James handed me a $5.20 calendar from the clearance bin with "Keep Crushing It, James" scrawled inside in his messy handwriting. The next morning, he swaggered over to my desk with that smug smile of his and asked if I was using my wonderful gift. I looked him straight in the eye, smiled back sweetly, and told him I had left it somewhere very special indeed. Right on CEO Elizabeth Morrison's mahogany desk with detailed reports showing our quarterly revenue, our profit margins, and my annual bonus of exactly $0. The color drained from his face instantly. 3 years ago, when I first stepped into the sleek offices of Dataflow Solutions on the 20th floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Chicago, I thought I had found my dream job. The company specialized in data analytics and business intelligence software for Fortune 500 clients, and they desperately needed a senior sales analyst who could handle their most demanding corporate accounts. During my interview, Elizabeth Morrison, the CEO and founder, had impressed me with her vision for the company's future. She was a sharp woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a professional bun and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to analyze everything around her. She wore a charcoal gray business suit that spoke of success without being flashy, and her office overlooked Lake Michigan with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the space feel both powerful and inspiring. "Delilah, we're looking for someone who can take our client relationships to the next level," Elizabeth had explained during that first meeting. "Our technology is excellent, but we need a sales professional who can translate complex data solutions into real business value for our clients. We want someone who can build long-term partnerships, not just close, quick deals." I was 29 years old and had spent the previous 5 years building my expertise in enterprise software sales. The opportunity to work with cutting-edge analytics technology while developing strategic client relationships was exactly what I had been hoping to find. Elizabeth offered me a competitive base salary of $78,000, plus commission comprehensive benefits, and the promise of significant growth opportunities as the company expanded. My direct supervisor was James Porter, the regional sales manager for the Midwest Territory. James was a man in his early 40s with thinning brown hair, a slight paunch that suggested too many client dinners, and the kind of practiced charm that worked well in initial sales meetings, but felt hollow in everyday interactions. He had been with Dataflow Solutions for 6 years and claimed responsibility for building the company's presence in the Chicago market. "Delilah, I'm going to be straight with you," James said during my first day orientation, leaning back in his ergonomic chair with his feet propped up on his desk. "This territory has huge potential, but it requires someone who really understands how to nurture enterprise relationships. These aren't small businesses looking for quick fixes. These are major corporations with complex decision-making processes and multi-million-dollar technology budgets." Within my first month, I had secured meetings with procurement teams from 3 major manufacturing companies and 2 financial services firms. My approach focused on thoroughly understanding each client's specific challenges before presenting any solutions. I spent hours studying their industry reports, analyzing their competitive landscapes, and developing customized proposals that addressed their unique operational needs. The breakthrough came during my 4th month when I landed a $2.1 million contract with Meridian Financial Group, a regional bank with branches across 7 states. The deal involved implementing our analytics platform across their entire loan processing operation, along with training programs for over 300 employees. It was the largest single contract that Dataflow Solutions had ever secured, and it established us as a serious player in the financial services technology market. But what really set the foundation for our record-breaking quarter was my strategy for building recurring revenue relationships rather than just pursuing one-time software sales. I convinced our existing clients to expand their usage of our platform by demonstrating how additional features could solve problems they hadn't even realized they had. I also developed a referral program that encouraged satisfied clients to recommend our services to their industry partners and subsidiaries. By the end of my second year, I was managing 14 major accounts with a combined annual value of over $8 million. My client retention rate was 97%, and my average deal size had increased by 140% compared to the company's historical performance. James regularly praised my work in team meetings and claimed that my success was a reflection of his excellent leadership and strategic guidance. The third year brought even more dramatic results. I secured contracts with 2 Fortune 200 companies that wanted to implement our analytics platform across multiple divisions and geographic regions. The first was Global Tech Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate that needed data analysis capabilities for supply chain optimization across their facilities in 12 countries. The second was Premier Healthcare Systems, a hospital network that wanted to use our software for patient flow analysis and resource allocation optimization. The Global Tech contract alone was worth $4.7 million over 3 years, with options for additional services and expansion that could potentially double that amount. The Premier Healthcare deal was structured as a $2.8 million initial implementation with guaranteed annual renewals that would generate consistent revenue for years to come. But it wasn't until I sat down to analyze our quarterly performance data that I fully understood the magnitude of what I had accomplished. Using the company's own business intelligence tools, I created detailed reports that tracked revenue generation by account manager deal size distribution and client acquisition patterns across the entire organization. The results were stunning. Out of Data Flow Solutions' total quarterly revenue of $12.3 million, my accounts had generated $11.1 million. I was personally responsible for 90% of the company's record-breaking performance. Every other sales representative in the company combined had contributed only $1.2 million to our quarterly results. Even more remarkable was the profit margin analysis. Because of my focus on long-term relationship building and strategic upselling, my deals had an average profit margin of 68% compared to the company average of 42%. My efficient sales process and thorough client preparation meant that implementation costs were lower and customer satisfaction scores were higher than any other accounts in the company's history. The data revealed something else that made my stomach tighten with anger and disbelief. James had been attending all the executive leadership meetings where quarterly performance was discussed, and according to meeting minutes that I accessed through our internal document system, he had been presenting my results as evidence of his exceptional management capabilities and strategic sales leadership. In presentation after presentation to Elizabeth Morrison and the board of directors, James had taken credit for developing the client relationship strategies that generated our record profits. He described the Global Tech and Premier Healthcare deals as examples of his innovative approach to enterprise sales, never once mentioning that I had been the one who identified the opportunities developed, the proposals conducted the negotiations, and managed the complex implementation processes. The most infuriating discovery was a performance review that James had submitted to Human Resources, where he rated his own leadership effectiveness as exceptional and claimed that his mentorship and strategic guidance had been instrumental in achieving unprecedented revenue growth. He had literally built his professional reputation on my work while positioning himself for the promotions and bonuses that should have been mine. As I sat in my cubicle at 7:30 that evening, surrounded by printouts of financial reports and performance data, I realized that I had been systematically exploited by someone who was supposed to be supporting my career development. The man who smiled and congratulated me after every successful deal close had been stealing credit for my achievements and using my success to advance his own position within the company. But what I didn't know yet was that James's deception went far deeper than just taking credit for my work. He had been playing a much more dangerous game, and I was about to discover that my record-breaking performance had actually put me in serious professional jeopardy. The company's quarterly celebration party was held at the prestigious Lakeside Convention Center, a gleaming venue with panoramic views of Chicago's skyline and Lake Michigan. Elizabeth Morrison had spared no expense for the event, hiring a catering company that served gourmet appetizers and premium cocktails, while a jazz quartet provided elegant background music. The ballroom was decorated with banners announcing record quarter, $12.3 million revenue, and large monitors displaying graphs and charts that celebrated our unprecedented financial success. Employees from all departments mingled in their business best, creating an atmosphere of accomplishment and optimism that should have made me feel proud and valued. Elizabeth took the stage at 8 o'clock to address the assembled staff. She looked radiant in a navy blue cocktail dress, her silver hair styled elegantly, and her gray eyes sparkling with genuine excitement about the company's achievement. Her speech was both professional and heartfelt, acknowledging the hard work and dedication that had made our success possible. "This quarter represents more than just financial achievement," Elizabeth announced to the crowd of nearly 80 employees. "It demonstrates that Data Flow Solutions has established itself as a leader in enterprise analytics technology. We've built something special here, and it's because every person in this room has contributed their talents and energy to our shared mission." As she spoke, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and frustration. The revenue numbers she was celebrating were largely the result of my work, but James was standing near the front of the audience, nodding and smiling as if he deserved equal credit for the company's success. Several times during Elizabeth's speech, I noticed executives and senior managers glancing in his direction with expressions of admiration and respect. The recognition portion of the evening began with Elizabeth announcing significant bonuses for the executive team and department heads. Chief Technology Officer Michael Chen received a $25,000 bonus for platform development improvements. Chief Financial Officer Patricia Williams was awarded $30,000 for her cost management and financial planning excellence. Head of Marketing Sarah Davidson earned $15,000 for her successful campaign that increased brand awareness by 42%. When Elizabeth announced that Regional Sales Manager James Porter would receive a $50,000 bonus for exceptional leadership and record-breaking revenue generation in the Midwest territory, the applause was thunderous. James stepped forward with a modest smile, shaking Elizabeth's hand and accepting a crystal award while photographers captured the moment for the company newsletter. I watched from my seat at a table near the back of the ballroom, my champagne glass untouched, as I processed the magnitude of what was happening. James was receiving $50,000, more than half of my annual base salary, specifically for the revenue performance that I had generated through my own accounts and client relationships. The injustice was so blatant and overwhelming that I felt physically nauseated. After the formal presentations concluded, the party shifted to a more casual networking format. Employees congratulated the bonus recipients, shared stories about successful projects, and discussed their excitement about the company's growth prospects. I tried to participate in conversations with colleagues from other departments, but my heart wasn't in the celebratory mood. It was during this informal portion of the evening that James approached me with a self-satisfied grin and a small gift bag in his hand. He had loosened his tie and was clearly enjoying the attention and congratulations he had received throughout the night. His cheeks were flushed from champagne and success, and his body language radiated the confidence of someone who felt completely secure in his position.
Delilah, I wanted to make sure you knew how much I appreciate all your hard work this quarter,
he said, extending the gift bag toward me with exaggerated ceremony.
I know the company budget didn't allow for individual bonuses for sales analysts this year, but I wanted to get you something special to show my recognition for your contributions.
I accepted the bag with curiosity and anticipation, hoping that James had perhaps used some of his bonus to purchase a meaningful gift that would demonstrate genuine appreciation for my efforts. Maybe a nice piece of jewelry or a gift certificate to an upscale restaurant, or even just a thoughtful book related to sales strategy or professional development. Instead, when I opened the bag and pulled out the contents, I found a cheap desk calendar with a generic inspirational quote on the cover and a clearance sticker that read $5.20 in bold red letters. The calendar was the kind of mass-produced item that you might find in the bargain bin at an office supply store during post-holiday clearance sales. But the most insulting aspect wasn't the cheapness of the gift itself. It was the message that James had written inside the front cover in his sloppy handwriting, "Keep crushing it, James." Not only had he given me a $5 calendar as recognition for generating $11 million in revenue, but he had signed his own name to the message, as if the calendar was somehow about his success rather than mine.
I saw this and thought it would be perfect for your desk,
James said with a patronizing smile.
You can use it to track all your important meetings and deadlines. I know how organized you like to be with your client scheduling. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. He was treating me like a junior employee who should be grateful for any acknowledgement regardless of how minimal or inappropriate it might be. The man who had just received $50,000 for my work was giving me a clearance bin calendar and acting as if he was being generous.
"Thank you, James," I managed to say through gritted teeth, forcing myself to maintain professional composure despite the humiliation burning in my chest.
"This is very thoughtful of you. I'm glad you like it,"
he replied, clearly oblivious to my sarcasm or simply choosing to ignore it.
"You've really stepped up this quarter, and I wanted to make sure your efforts didn't go unnoticed. Keep up the good work, and who knows, maybe next year you'll be eligible for some of those bigger recognition rewards." As James walked away to accept more congratulations from other colleagues, I stood alone holding the cheap calendar and trying to process the complete lack of respect or awareness that he had just demonstrated. The gift wasn't just inadequate. It was deliberately insulting, designed to reinforce the hierarchy between us and remind me that my role was to generate revenue while he received recognition and rewards. But the true extent of James's betrayal was revealed the following Monday morning during a conversation that I overheard while walking past the executive conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear CFO Patricia Williams discussing bonus calculations with Elizabeth Morrison and two board members who had joined the meeting via video conference. The $50,000 bonus for James Porter was specifically tied to the exceptional performance metrics from his sales team. Patricia was explaining while reviewing financial documents on her laptop. The revenue generation in his territory exceeded our most optimistic projections by over 40%, and the profit margins were significantly higher than our historical averages. James has consistently demonstrated the kind of leadership and strategic thinking that drives sustainable growth, Elizabeth added. His approach to client relationship management and team development has created a model that we should consider implementing in our other regional territories. My blood ran cold as I realized that James hadn't just taken credit for my individual achievements. He had convinced the executive team that his management style and strategic guidance were responsible for the entire region's success. The $50,000 bonus wasn't just recognition for good performance. It was payment for innovations and leadership qualities that existed only in James's fictional narrative. I quietly moved away from the conference room door before anyone noticed my presence, but the damage was done. The conversation confirmed my worst suspicions about the systematic nature of James's deception. He wasn't just an opportunistic manager taking credit where it wasn't due. He was deliberately constructing a false professional reputation built entirely on my work and achievements. The cheap calendar sitting on my desk became a symbol of everything that was wrong with my situation at Dataflow Solutions. While I was generating millions of dollars in revenue and building the strategic client relationships that were driving the company's success, I was being treated like a replaceable employee whose contributions barely warranted a clearance bin thank you gift. But as I sat staring at that ridiculous calendar with James's smug signature inside the cover, I began to formulate a plan that would expose his deception and ensure that credit was finally given where it was actually due. The gift that was intended to humiliate me was about to become the catalyst for the biggest professional reckoning that James Porter had ever experienced. The Monday morning after the celebration party, I arrived at the office 30 minutes early with a new sense of purpose and determination. The humiliation of receiving that $5 calendar while James collected $50,000 for my work had crystallized my resolve to document the full scope of his deception and find a way to expose what he was doing. My first step was to systematically review every piece of internal communication related to our quarterly performance and client relationships. As a senior sales analyst, I had access to most of the company's project management systems, client databases, and internal reporting tools. What I needed was concrete evidence that would prove James had been systematically taking credit for work that I had performed. I started with our customer relationship management software, where every client interaction, proposal submission, and contract negotiation was supposed to be logged and tracked. What I discovered was a pattern of deliberate misrepresentation that was both sophisticated and infuriating. For every major deal that I had closed, James had created summary reports that described the sales process in terms of his strategic oversight and management guidance. The global tech industry's contract, which I had spent 4 months developing through careful relationship building and technical analysis, was presented as an example of James's innovative approach to enterprise client acquisition. According to his internal reports, James had identified the opportunity through strategic market analysis and developed the customized proposal strategy that secured the $4.7 million commitment. The reality was that I had discovered the opportunity through my personal network of industry contacts, spent dozens of hours researching Global Tech's operational challenges, and created every element of the proposal that ultimately won their business. Even more disturbing was James's documentation of the Premier Healthcare Systems deal. His internal summary claimed that he had personally managed the complex negotiation process and utilized advanced relationship-building techniques to overcome client objections and secure the $2.8 million contract. In reality, James had attended exactly 2 meetings during the entire 6-month sales process, both times as a silent observer, while I handled all the actual client interaction and problem-solving. But the most damaging evidence came from email communications that I found in our shared departmental folders. James had been sending regular updates to Elizabeth Morrison and the executive team describing our regional performance and his role in driving revenue growth. These emails painted a picture of James as a hands-on manager who was directly involved in every aspect of major client relationships. One email from 6 weeks earlier was particularly infuriating. Elizabeth, I wanted to update you on the excellent progress we're making with our Q3 enterprise clients. My direct involvement in the Global Tech and Premier Healthcare negotiations has been instrumental in moving both deals toward closure. I've been working closely with the client decision makers to address their technical concerns and customize our proposals to meet their specific operational requirements. I'm confident that my relationship building approach will result in contracts that exceed our revenue targets by a significant margin. The email was a complete fabrication. James had never spoken directly with decision makers at either company, had no involvement in addressing technical concerns, and had contributed nothing to the customization of our proposals. Yet he was presenting himself as the primary driver of our success and positioning his relationship-building approach as the key factor in our anticipated revenue growth. As I continued digging through internal documents, I began to notice something even more disturbing. This pattern of taking credit for others' work wasn't limited to my accounts. James had been systematically appropriating achievements from multiple employees over several years, building his professional reputation on a foundation of stolen accomplishments. I found performance reviews where James took credit for marketing campaign ideas that had actually been developed by Sarah Davidson's team. He had claimed responsibility for cost-saving initiatives that were proposed and implemented by junior analysts in the finance department. He had even taken credit for employee retention improvements that resulted from HR policy changes that he had opposed during planning meetings. The most shocking discovery came when I accessed historical sales data from before I joined the company. I wanted to understand James's actual performance track record and see how the regional revenue numbers had changed over time. What I found was evidence that James's management had actually been associated with declining performance until I arrived and began generating the major contracts that transformed our regional results. In the 3 years before I was hired, James's territory had consistently underperformed compared to company averages. His client retention rates were below 50%. His average deal sizes were shrinking year over year, and several major accounts had terminated their contracts due to poor service and relationship management. The regional revenue had been declining by an average of 12% annually. But according to James's internal reports and performance summaries, those same years were described as periods of strategic restructuring and market positioning that had created the foundation for future success. He had taken 3 years of declining performance and reframed them as evidence of his long-term strategic thinking and market development expertise. The documentation painted a picture of someone who had built his entire professional identity around lies and stolen achievements. James wasn't just an opportunistic manager who occasionally took more credit than he deserved. He was a systematic fraud who had been deceiving the company leadership for years while undermining the careers of the employees who were actually driving business success. But as I prepared to compile this evidence into a comprehensive report that would expose James's deception, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in a folder of draft documents that James apparently thought was private, I found emails and performance evaluations that revealed he was planning to eliminate me as a potential threat to his fabricated reputation. The first warning sign was a draft email to Elizabeth Morrison titled, "Performance Concerns, Delilah Walsh." The email described me as increasingly difficult to manage and suggested that my independent approach to client relationships was creating coordination challenges that could impact our regional performance. James was laying the groundwork to portray my success as a management problem rather than an achievement. Even more alarming was a draft performance review that positioned my record-breaking results as evidence of insufficient team collaboration and concerning independence from established sales processes. James was preparing to argue that my $11 million in revenue generation was actually a problem because I wasn't following his management guidance closely enough. The final piece of evidence was a preliminary memo outlining a plan to redistribute my major accounts among other sales representatives
to ensure better integration with regional management strategies. James was planning to take away the clients that I had spent years developing, presumably so that he could claim credit for maintaining and expanding those relationships under his direct supervision. As I sat in my cubicle at 9 o'clock that evening, surrounded by printouts and screenshots that documented the full scope of James's deception and planning, I realized that I was facing a much more serious situation than I had initially understood. This wasn't just about getting proper credit for my work. James was actively planning to destroy my career to protect his own fraudulent reputation. The cheap calendar on my desk seemed to mock me as I contemplated my options. James had given me a $5 gift while planning to steal my clients, undermine my performance reviews, and potentially get me fired for the crime of being too successful without giving him enough credit. But what James didn't know was that I wasn't the only employee who had been watching his behavior and documenting his patterns of deception. The evidence I had gathered was about to become part of a much larger investigation that would expose not just his theft of my achievements, but his systematic exploitation of multiple employees across the entire organization. The next phase of James's plan began to unfold the following Tuesday morning when he called me into his office for what he described as an important strategic discussion about optimizing our client relationship management processes. His tone was friendly and professional, but there was an underlying tension that immediately put me on alert. James's office was located in the northeast corner of our floor with windows facing both the lake and the downtown skyline. He had decorated the space with awards and certificates from his 6 years with the company, along with framed photos of himself at various industry conferences and client events. His desk was dominated by 3 large monitors and an expensive leather chair that he had purchased with his own money to replace the standard office furniture.
Delilah, I've been reviewing our quarterly performance and thinking about ways to maintain our momentum going forward.
He began gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the 2 chairs facing his desk.
Your individual results have been outstanding, but I'm concerned that we might be missing opportunities for better coordination and knowledge sharing across our client portfolio.
I settled into the chair and tried to read his expression, but James had perfected the art of maintaining a pleasant professional demeanor that revealed nothing about his actual intentions. His hands were folded calmly on his desk, and his voice carried the tone of a thoughtful manager genuinely concerned about team optimization.
What specific opportunities are you thinking about? I asked, keeping my own voice neutral while mentally preparing for whatever trap he was about to set.
Well, for example, your relationship with global tech industries is obviously very strong, but I think there might be additional value in having other team members involved in those interactions, James explained, pulling out a folder that contained what appeared to be organizational charts and account assignment proposals. Cross-training and knowledge sharing would help us avoid overdependence on any single relationship manager. The phrase, overdependence on any single relationship manager, was clearly designed to sound like reasonable business planning, but I recognized it as the beginning of his strategy to redistribute my accounts and take direct control of the client relationships that I had built. James was positioning my success as a risk factor that needed to be managed through his oversight. I understand the value of knowledge sharing, I replied carefully, but these enterprise clients have invested significant time in developing trust and communication patterns with me personally. Introducing new relationship managers could disrupt the continuity that they value and potentially impact our renewal rates.
That's exactly the kind of thinking that concerns me, Delilah, James said with a slight frown that suggested disappointment rather than anger.
You're approaching these relationships as if they belong to you personally rather than to Data Flow Solutions as a company. That level of individual ownership can create problems when we need flexibility in our account management strategies.
His words were carefully chosen to make my client dedication sound like a character flaw rather than a professional strength. James was reframing my successful relationship building as evidence of poor team collaboration and insufficient management oversight. He was setting up a narrative that would justify removing me from the accounts that I had developed. I've also been noticing some irregularities in your client communication patterns. James continued, opening another folder that contained printouts of emails and meeting schedules. You've been scheduling client meetings and conference calls without always coordinating through proper management channels. That kind of independent operation creates visibility gaps that could lead to missed opportunities or miscommunication. The accusation was absurd. I had been scheduling client meetings and calls based on the needs and preferences of the clients themselves, responding quickly to their requests and maintaining the flexible, responsive communication style that they valued. James had never previously expressed any interest in being included in routine client communications, and suddenly requiring management approval for every interaction would slow down our response times and potentially frustrate our clients. James, most of those meetings are routine check-ins and technical discussions that don't require management involvement. I explained, trying to maintain a reasonable tone despite my growing frustration. The clients appreciate being able to reach me directly for quick questions and updates. Adding additional approval layers would make us less responsive and could impact their satisfaction with our service.
That's where you're wrong, Delilah.
James replied with the patronizing patience of someone explaining a simple concept to a confused child. Effective account management requires consistent oversight and strategic coordination. Your independent approach might feel efficient in the short term, but it creates risks and missed opportunities that you might not be aware of. What James was really saying was that he needed to insert himself into my client relationships so that he could claim credit for maintaining and expanding those accounts. He couldn't continue taking credit for my work if the clients viewed me as their primary contact and had no relationship with him as their supposed account manager.
I'm going to be implementing some new processes to address these coordination issues,
James announced, pulling out a third folder that contained what appeared to be formal policy documents.
Starting next week, all client meetings will need to be scheduled through my calendar to ensure proper management visibility. All client communications will be copied to me so that I can provide strategic guidance and oversight, and all major client decisions will require my approval before implementation. The new processes were designed to insert James into every aspect of my client relationships, while creating a paper trail that would support his claims of hands-on management involvement. Every successful client interaction would become evidence of his strategic guidance, while any problems or delays would be attributed to my failure to follow proper management protocols. But the most alarming part of James's plan was revealed when he pulled out a final document that looked like a formal performance improvement plan. I'm also going to need you to provide detailed documentation of all your current client relationships, including contact information for decision makers, summaries of ongoing projects, and strategic assessments of expansion opportunities. This information will help me better support your work and identify areas where additional management guidance might be beneficial. James was asking me to provide him with everything he would need to take over my client relationships entirely. The contact information project summaries and strategic assessments would give him the ability to bypass me and communicate directly with my clients, while positioning himself as the senior account manager who had been overseeing our relationships all along. I'll need this documentation completed within 2 weeks,
James added, sliding the performance improvement plan across his desk toward me.
I know it's additional work, but proper documentation is essential for effective account management and professional development.
As I reviewed the requirements outlined in the performance improvement plan, I realized that James was creating an impossible situation for me.
If I complied with his documentation requirements, I would be providing him with everything he needed to steal my clients and eliminate me as a threat to his fabricated reputation. If I refused to comply, he would use my non-compliance as evidence of insubordination and grounds for termination. "James, I have some concerns about these new processes," I said, choosing my words carefully. "The clients value the direct, responsive communication style that we've established, and adding multiple approval layers could impact their satisfaction with our service. I'd like to discuss alternative approaches that might address your oversight concerns without disrupting the client relationships."
Delilah, I think you're overestimating your importance to these client relationships,
James replied with a cold smile that finally revealed his true intentions. "Companies like Global Tech and Premier Healthcare work with data flow solutions as an organization, not with individual employees. They'll adapt to new processes just fine, especially when those processes are designed to provide them with better strategic support and management oversight." The meeting concluded with James handing me copies of all the new policy documents and scheduling a follow-up meeting for the following week to review my progress on the documentation requirements. As I walked back to my cubicle, I realized that I had just witnessed the beginning of James's final assault on my career and client relationships. But what James didn't know was that our conversation had been more revealing than he intended. His eagerness to take control of my client relationships and his emphasis on positioning himself as the strategic leader behind our regional success had confirmed everything I had suspected about his motives and planning. More importantly, I wasn't facing this threat alone. While James had been plotting my professional destruction, other employees throughout the company had been documenting his patterns of deception and preparing their own evidence of his systematic fraud. The trap that James thought he was setting for me was about to become the catalyst for exposing his crimes to the highest levels of company leadership. The next morning, I arrived at the office feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of James's manipulation and uncertain about how to respond to his increasingly aggressive attempts to control my client relationships. As I sat at my desk reviewing the documentation requirements he had imposed, I noticed Kevin Chen, our IT director, approaching with 2 cups of coffee and an unusually serious expression. Kevin was a quiet, methodical man in his late 30s who had been with Data Flow Solutions for 4 years. He had a master's degree in computer science from Northwestern University and was responsible for maintaining all of our technology infrastructure, including the client database systems and internal communication networks that I relied on for my work. We had always had a friendly professional relationship, but he rarely initiated personal conversations.
Delilah, do you have a few minutes to talk privately?
Kevin asked, setting one of the coffee cups on my desk and glancing around to ensure that James wasn't within earshot.
There's something important that I need to discuss with you, and I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say. I followed Kevin to a small conference room on the opposite side of the floor, away from James's office and the main traffic areas where our conversation might be overheard. Kevin closed the door and activated the room's sound masking system, a feature designed to prevent eavesdropping during sensitive client discussions. Delilah, I know what James is planning to do to you,
Kevin began without preamble, his normally calm voice tight with anger.
I've been monitoring the company's computer systems, and I've seen the emails he's been drafting, the performance evaluations he's preparing, and the account redistribution proposals he's planning to submit to Elizabeth Morrison. My heart started racing as I realized that Kevin had access to information that could either save my career or destroy it, depending on his intentions and loyalties.
Kevin, I don't understand. Why are you telling me this?
Because James has been doing the same thing to other employees for years, and some of us have been documenting everything,
Kevin replied, pulling out a tablet that contained what appeared to be extensive files and folders.
You're not his first target, Delilah. You're just the latest in a pattern of exploitation and fraud that goes back to shortly after he was hired. Kevin opened a folder on his tablet that contained screenshots of emails, performance reviews, and internal communications dating back over 3 years. The evidence showed a systematic pattern of James taking credit for other employees' work, undermining successful team members who threatened his position, and manipulating performance evaluations to protect his fraudulent reputation. 2 years ago, James did the same thing to Angela Martinez in our business development department. Kevin explained, scrolling through email threads that documented James's campaign against Angela. She had developed a partnership program that generated over $2 million in new revenue, but James convinced Elizabeth that Angela wasn't following proper management protocols. Angela was transferred to a different department with reduced responsibilities, and James took credit for the entire partnership program. The parallels to my own situation were unmistakable. James had used the same strategy of questioning Angela's collaboration and independence, implementing new oversight requirements that made it impossible for her to maintain the relationships she had built, and ultimately positioning himself as the strategic mind behind her achievements. Before Angela, there was Derek Thompson in our client services department. Kevin continued, opening another folder of documentation. Derek had developed innovative training programs that improved customer satisfaction scores by 37%, but James reported him for exceeding his authority and implementing unauthorized changes to company procedures. Derek was placed on a performance improvement plan and eventually resigned when James made his working conditions impossible. As Kevin showed me email after email documenting James's systematic destruction of successful employees, I began to understand that I was facing a predator who had perfected his techniques through years of practice. James wasn't just an opportunistic manager who occasionally took more credit than he deserved. He was a calculating fraud who identified talented employees, stole their achievements, and then eliminated them as threats to his fabricated reputation. Kevin, this is incredible evidence, but I still don't understand why you're sharing it with me, I said, struggling to process the magnitude of what he was revealing. Because we've been building a comprehensive case against James, and we need your documentation and testimony to complete it, Kevin replied, opening a new folder that contained what appeared to be organizational charts and contact information. There are 7 of us who have been working together for the past 6 months, gathering evidence and preparing to present everything to Elizabeth Morrison and the board of directors. The scope of the internal investigation was far more extensive than I had imagined. Kevin explained that the group included employees from multiple departments who had either been targeted by James themselves or had witnessed his exploitation of their colleagues. They had been meeting secretly, sharing information, and building a comprehensive case that documented James's fraud across the entire organization. Sarah Davidson from marketing has been documenting how James took credit for her campaign strategies and budget optimization ideas. Kevin continued, scrolling through a detailed timeline of James's appropriated achievements. Marcus Williams from finance has records showing how James claimed responsibility for cost-saving initiatives that Marcus actually developed and implemented. Linda Foster from HR has been tracking James's manipulation of performance reviews and his use of disciplinary procedures to eliminate employees who threatened his position. The revelation that HR representative Linda Foster was part of the investigation was particularly significant. Linda had access to personnel files, performance evaluations, and internal communications that could provide crucial evidence of James's systematic fraud. Her involvement also suggested that the group had been careful to include someone who understood the legal and policy implications of their discoveries. We've also been working with Tom Bradley from accounting, Kevin added. Tom has been analyzing the financial impact of James's behavior, calculating the costs associated with employee turnover, lost productivity, and missed opportunities that resulted from his exploitation and elimination of talented team members. The financial analysis was a brilliant addition to their case. By quantifying the business costs of James's fraud, the group could demonstrate that his behavior wasn't just ethically wrong, but also financially damaging to the company. Elizabeth Morrison and the board of directors would be forced to view James's actions as a threat to organizational performance rather than just an interpersonal management issue. What we need from you, Delilah, is documentation of your client relationships and the revenue you've generated along with evidence of James's attempts to take credit for your work, Kevin explained. We also need you to provide testimony about his recent efforts to undermine your position and take control of your accounts. I thought about the evidence I had already gathered during my own investigation, including the email communications where James had falsely claimed credit for my achievements, and the draft documents where he had planned to redistribute my accounts and characterize my success as a management problem. I have extensive documentation, I told Kevin. Email threads, performance reports, client communication records, and even draft documents where James outlined his plans to eliminate me as a threat. The evidence clearly shows that he's been systematically taking credit for my work while planning to destroy my career. Kevin's expression brightened with satisfaction and relief. That's exactly what we need to complete our case. With your evidence added to what we've already gathered, we'll be able to present Elizabeth Morrison with a comprehensive picture of James's fraud and the damage he's been causing to the company. As our meeting concluded, Kevin provided me with secure contact information for the other members of their investigation team and scheduled a follow-up meeting where I would be able to review their complete file of evidence against James. For the first time since discovering the scope of James's deception, I felt hope that justice might actually be possible. But what neither Kevin nor I realized at that moment was that Elizabeth Morrison had been conducting her own investigation into James's behavior, and our comprehensive case was about to intersect with evidence that she had been gathering independently for several months. 3 days after my conversation with Kevin, our investigation team gathered for a comprehensive planning meeting in a private conference room at the Riverside Business Center, a professional facility located 6 blocks from our office. The neutral location was chosen to ensure complete confidentiality and avoid any possibility of James discovering our activities. The team that assembled that evening was more impressive and organized than I had expected. Sarah Davidson from marketing had prepared detailed timelines showing how James had appropriated her campaign strategies and budget optimization ideas. Marcus Williams from finance had created financial models demonstrating the business costs of James's fraudulent behavior. Linda Foster from HR had compiled personnel records documenting James's manipulation of performance reviews and disciplinary procedures. Tom Bradley from accounting had developed a comprehensive analysis of revenue attribution, clearly showing the disconnect between James's claimed contributions and the actual sources of our regional performance. Kevin Chen had prepared technical evidence of James's unauthorized access to employee communications and his systematic documentation of false achievements. Our goal is to present Elizabeth Morrison with evidence that is so comprehensive and well documented that she has no choice but to take immediate action, Sarah explained as she reviewed the agenda for our presentation. We need to show not just that James is taking credit for other people's work, but that his behavior represents a systematic pattern of fraud that has been damaging the company for years. The evidence we had compiled was indeed overwhelming. The team had documented 17 separate instances of James taking credit for other employees' achievements, 11 cases of him undermining successful team members to protect his fraudulent reputation, and 6 examples of talented employees leaving the company as a direct result of his exploitation and manipulation. The financial impact analysis is particularly compelling, Marcus added, displaying charts and graphs that quantified the business costs of James's behavior. We can demonstrate that his fraud has cost the company approximately $420,000 in lost productivity, employee turnover, and missed opportunities over the past 3 years. Linda Foster's HR perspective was especially valuable because it provided legal and policy context for James's actions. What James has been doing isn't just unethical, Linda explained. It constitutes fraud, harassment, and potentially illegal retaliation against employees who threaten his position. The company has legal liability if we allow this behavior to continue. My contribution to the case included the evidence I had gathered about James's appropriation of my client relationships and revenue generation, along with documentation of his recent attempts to undermine my position and take control of my accounts. The cheap calendar that James had given me as recognition for generating $11 million in revenue had become a powerful symbol of his disrespect and exploitation. Elizabeth Morrison needs to understand that this isn't just about individual grievances, Kevin emphasized as we finalized our presentation materials. James's behavior represents a fundamental threat to the company's culture, performance, and legal standing. We need to frame this as a business issue that requires immediate executive action. We scheduled our presentation for the following Tuesday morning, requesting a confidential meeting with Elizabeth Morrison to discuss urgent personnel and performance issues that require immediate attention. Linda Foster had coordinated the request through official HR channels, ensuring that our meeting would be taken seriously and given appropriate priority. But as we prepared to leave the conference room that evening, Kevin received a phone call that changed everything about our situation. The caller was Elizabeth Morrison herself, and she had an unexpected message that would transform our investigation from a whistleblowing effort into something much more significant. "Elizabeth wants to meet with all of us tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Kevin announced after ending the call. She said she's been conducting her own investigation into James Porter's behavior, and she needs to review our evidence immediately. The revelation that Elizabeth Morrison had been independently investigating James was both shocking and encouraging. It suggested that our concerns about his fraudulent behavior were well-founded, and that company leadership was already aware that serious problems needed to be addressed. Did she give any indication of what she's discovered?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with anticipation and nervous excitement. "She said she's received anonymous complaints about James's management practices and has been gathering evidence for the past 3 months, Kevin replied. Apparently, she's been monitoring his communications, reviewing his performance claims, and analyzing discrepancies between his reported contributions and actual business results. The next morning, our investigation team arrived at Data Flow Solutions 30 minutes early and was escorted directly to Elizabeth Morrison's office by her executive assistant. Elizabeth had cleared her entire morning schedule for our meeting and had prepared the conference area of her office with multiple monitors and presentation equipment. Elizabeth Morrison looked every bit the successful CEO that morning, wearing a tailored charcoal gray suit with her silver hair styled professionally, and her intelligent gray eyes focused intently on the materials we had brought for our presentation. But there was also something different about her demeanor, a combination of anger and determination that suggested she was prepared to take decisive action. "Before you begin your presentation, I need to share some information with you," Elizabeth announced as we settled into our chairs around her conference table. 3 months ago, I began receiving anonymous messages about James Porter's management practices and his claims regarding regional sales performance. Elizabeth opened a laptop and displayed a series of emails that had been sent to her personal account from an untraceable address. The messages contained specific allegations about James's theft of employee achievements, his manipulation of performance reviews, and his systematic elimination of talented team members who threatened his fraudulent reputation. Initially, I was skeptical about these anonymous accusations, Elizabeth continued, but the messages included enough specific details and documentation that I decided to conduct a discreet investigation to determine whether there was any substance to the claims. Elizabeth's independent investigation had been remarkably thorough. She had hired an external consulting firm to analyze performance attribution and revenue generation across all departments. She had reviewed 3 years of personnel files and performance evaluations. She had even implemented covert monitoring of internal communications to identify patterns of deception and manipulation. What I discovered confirmed my worst fears, Elizabeth said, displaying charts and graphs that documented the scope of James's fraud. James Porter has been systematically taking credit for other employees' achievements while undermining and eliminating talented team members who could expose his deception. The evidence that Elizabeth had gathered was even more comprehensive than our own investigation. Her external consulting firm had conducted detailed interviews with former employees who had left the company, uncovering additional instances of James's exploitation and fraud that we hadn't been aware of. The financial impact of James's behavior has been substantial, Elizabeth continued, showing us cost analyses that exceeded even Marcus Williams's estimates. We've lost approximately $640,000 in productivity employee turnover costs and missed business opportunities as a direct result of his fraudulent management practices. But the most shocking revelation came when Elizabeth displayed communication records that showed James had been planning to frame me for client data theft and potentially have me arrested for corporate espionage. His scheme went far beyond taking credit for my work or redistributing my accounts. He was planning to destroy my career completely and potentially send me to prison to protect his fraudulent reputation. James Porter represents a clear and present danger to this company and to the employees who work here, Elizabeth concluded. I've already consulted with our legal team and prepared the documentation necessary for his immediate termination and potential criminal prosecution. As our meeting concluded, Elizabeth thanked our investigation team for their courage and thoroughness in gathering evidence against James. But she also revealed that our work had provided the final pieces of documentation she needed to move forward with legal action that could result in James facing criminal charges for fraud and harassment. The cheap calendar sitting on my desk was about to become evidence in a criminal case, and James Porter's career was about to end in the most dramatic way possible. 3 weeks later, I sat in my new corner office on the 22nd floor of the Meridian Tower, reviewing quarterly projections for the expanded Midwest region that I now managed as Director of Strategic Client Relations. The view from my windows encompassed both Lake Michigan and the downtown Chicago skyline, providing a daily reminder of how dramatically my professional life had been transformed. James Porter was no longer employed by Data Flow Solutions. Elizabeth Morrison had terminated him immediately after reviewing the comprehensive evidence that our investigation team had compiled, along with her own independent findings about his systematic fraud and employee exploitation. The termination had been swift and decisive, with security escorts ensuring that James left the building within minutes of being informed of his dismissal. But termination was only the beginning of James's problems. The evidence of his fraudulent behavior had been so extensive and well documented that Elizabeth Morrison had forwarded the entire case file to the Cook County District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. James was currently facing charges of corporate fraud, harassment, and potentially theft of intellectual property based on his systematic appropriation of employee achievements. The $50,000 bonus that James had received for my work had been recovered and redistributed as part of a comprehensive compensation adjustment program that Elizabeth implemented to address the financial impacts of his fraud. I had received the full $50,000 that should have been mine originally, along with an additional $25,000 retention bonus and a promotion to the director-level position that reflected my actual contributions to the company's success. The cheap calendar that James had given me as recognition for generating $11 million in revenue had become a symbol of transformation rather than humiliation. Elizabeth had it framed and displayed in the company's main conference room as a reminder of the importance of recognizing and valuing employee contributions appropriately. Below the frame was a plaque that read, "Excellence deserves recognition, not exploitation." The other members of our investigation team had also been rewarded for their courage and integrity in exposing James's fraud. Kevin Chen had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer after the previous CTO decided to pursue opportunities at another company. Sarah Davidson had been given expanded responsibilities as Vice President of Marketing and Communications. Marcus Williams had become the Director of Financial Analysis, and Linda Foster had been promoted to Director of Human Resources. The systemic changes that Elizabeth implemented as a result of our investigation went far beyond individual promotions and compensation adjustments. She had established a new employee advocacy program that provided confidential channels for reporting management misconduct and exploitation. She had implemented regular performance attribution audits to ensure that achievements were properly credited to the employees who actually generated them. Most importantly, Elizabeth had created a company culture committee tasked with identifying and addressing any patterns of behavior that could lead to the kind of systematic fraud and exploitation that James had perpetrated. The committee included representatives from every department and level of the organization, ensuring that problems would be identified and addressed before they could cause significant damage. My new role as Director of Strategic Client Relations allowed me to expand the relationship-building approach that had been so successful with global tech industries and premier healthcare systems. I was now responsible for developing enterprise partnerships across the entire Midwest region with a team of 6 junior account managers who reported to me and learned from the methodologies that had generated our record-breaking revenue performance. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. James's attempt to steal credit for my achievements and eliminate me as a threat to his fraudulent reputation had ultimately led to my receiving far greater recognition and responsibility than I would have obtained through normal career progression. His cheap calendar gift had catalyzed a chain of events that resulted in his professional destruction and my dramatic advancement. But the most satisfying aspect of the entire experience wasn't the personal vindication or career advancement. It was the knowledge that 7 other employees had been willing to risk their own positions to stand up against injustice and protect someone they barely knew personally. Kevin Chen, Sarah Davidson, Marcus Williams, Linda Foster. Tom Bradley and the others had demonstrated a level of integrity and courage that restored my faith in workplace relationships and professional ethics. The company's financial performance had improved dramatically since James's termination. Without his systematic undermining of talented employees, productivity had increased by 23% across all departments. Employee satisfaction scores had reached their highest levels in company history. Most importantly, the collaborative merit-based culture that Elizabeth was fostering had begun attracting exceptional talent from competitors who were dealing with their own issues of management fraud and employee exploitation. My personal client relationships had flourished under the new management structure. Global Tech Industries had expanded their contract by an additional $2.4 million based on their satisfaction with our service and their confidence in our organizational stability. Premier healthcare systems had referred us to 3 other hospital networks, generating over $5 million in new business opportunities. The lesson that emerged from this entire experience was both profound and practical. Toxic management behavior can only survive in environments where good employees remain silent and isolated. When people with integrity work together and document misconduct systematically, even the most sophisticated fraud and exploitation schemes cannot withstand scrutiny from ethical leadership. I had learned that my professional worth wasn't determined by how one dishonest manager chose to treat me, but by the actual value I created for clients and the company. The $11 million in revenue that I generated spoke louder than James's cheap calendar, and the systematic documentation of his fraud had ultimately protected not just my career, but the careers of multiple other employees who might have become his future victims. The transformation of data flow solutions from a company where fraud and exploitation could flourish into an organization that actively protected and rewarded merit had created opportunities for everyone. My promotion had opened up advancement possibilities for junior employees. The elimination of James's toxic management had improved collaboration across all departments. The new policies and oversight mechanisms had created a workplace where talent could thrive without fear of exploitation. As I prepared to leave my office that evening, I reflected on how a $5.20 clearance calendar had become the catalyst for the most significant positive change in my professional life. Sometimes the worst treatment we receive from toxic people becomes the exact motivation we need to fight back and create something better than what we had before. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had an experience where someone's attempt to diminish your worth actually motivated you to prove your value in ways that transformed your entire situation? Sometimes the people who try to exploit us end up creating the circumstances that allow us to discover our true potential and build the success we deserve. Thank you for following my journey from that humiliating moment with the cheap calendar to the director-level position where I can now mentor other employees and help create the kind of workplace culture where everyone's contributions are recognized and valued. If this story inspired you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to my channel for more stories about overcoming workplace injustice and building meaningful success, and share this with someone who might need to hear that toxic treatment doesn't define your worth. Remember that documentation, allies, and persistence can overcome even the most sophisticated workplace fraud. Your achievements speak for themselves when you give them the opportunity, and the right leadership will always recognize and reward genuine value over fabricated claims.